Okay. Can you talk for a minute? What are the pros and cons of hiring a private lawyer like yourself versus a public defender, or versus, God forbid, defending yourself?
Defending yourself is close, well, it's certainly not impossible if you're a lawyer. You might be able to. Even then, it's a huge problem because your emotions get in the way. Even if you know exactly what to do and you know all the rules, you know how to object to everything, and you understand how you should prepare a case, it's still difficult when someone is standing in your face and telling you that essentially that you're a liar and
Mm.
twisting facts not to react improperly. And for the average person who's not trained, it's impossible. So you start off with a huge problem if you try to represent yourself. If you are, in most courts, they won't let you. They'll require you to have an attorney, whether they appoint the attorney. Some of them have. Sometimes you have a public defender system. Some have appointed attorneys, and you don't get them for free. When you get through, there is a price that they'll charge you, maybe less than what a private attorney charges. But the courts are generally very worried about allowing someone to represent themselves. Because later on, they're going to come back and say that they didn't get a fair deal, they didn't understand it, and that's a major problem for the courts.
Right.
As far as hiring an attorney, if your attorney knows what he's doing, if he's competent, he can be a tremendous help. One, in deciding what are you going to do with your case? What does it really mean? What's important and what's not? What the average person thinks a trial will entail is not exactly what it is. It's not like television.
Right.
There are decisions that need to be made, and your attorney's your guide. The attorney helps you to understand what all of this system, how the system functions, and how you fit into it. Without that attorney, without someone to tell you, it's almost impossible to have your case handled properly.
Okay. And this is a good question for you because you've been in the business so long. What have you learned about people's behavior and their reaction to being, arrested and accused of DWI? What the human side of the whole process. What insights have you gained into it?
I think I've learned a lot about human nature, about the way people react. Because most people who are charged with misdemeanors they're good people. They're people who either they made a mistake or the police have created a situation where it looks like they made a mistake. But reactions generally are rational. Most people, and I think I've gained even more respect for people's common sense, but also a tremendous amount of respect for the system that we have, which protects our rights. Over the years, I've seen really very few tremendous miscarriages of justice. Sometimes I don't like exactly what happened, but generally the cases work well. Generally, if you decide that you have a good chance to win a case, you really do.
Mm.
And clients listen. They'll listen and they'll react in a sensible way, the way you ask them to. And to me, that gives me a lot more respect for the average person.
Okay. And is there a particular story that a lot of clients come to you with, like, I only had 2 beers, or the police didn't really have a good reason to stop me? Is there anything you hear a lot?
2 beers is almost always the case.
Okay.
Yeah, I only had 2 drinks, or I only had 2 beers, didn't know more, and I think I looked, and I think I was fine. That's almost always the response. Generally, I was within a few blocks of my house. The vast majority of times, they're very close to home, and normally that's when people get a little bit careless.
Mm.
They don't pay attention when they make a turn. They don't use their turn signal. They run a red light. They're almost home, and they're not thinking about anything else. They're not observant.
Mm.
But generally, that's the 2 beer rule is standard, and it's really not a bad thing to say because most people who are stopped have been drinking to some extent. It's not illegal to drink and then drive. It's illegal to be intoxicated and drive.
Right.
If you've been out for the evening and you say I've had nothing, it's not going to make much sense. If there's a smell of alcohol, especially if there's an open container in the car.
So do you feel the current DWI punishments are too harsh, or are they too lax, and why?
I think they're awfully harsh, actually. We tend to be they get stricter and stricter every year. Each legislature is trying to find ways to crack down on crime, or to be hard on crime. They call it that. And the result is that we're restricting people's rights more and more, and it becomes more and more difficult for people to be able to comply with the rules that we have when they're placed on probation for DWI. When you start putting monitors on people's legs and requiring it, when you put monitors on their cars, and sometimes ones that don't work very well, and you require that they have devices on their phones and have little positioning, and we keep adding these penalties, and for a lot of people it's really unnecessary, but it causes a huge problem for them when they're trying to function in normal life. If you have a monitor on your leg and you don't need it, and you're working in a restaurant, most of the patrons are not going to be very happy, and you're probably not going to have a job for very long. And very often it's not necessary, but politically, being tough on DWIs and coming up with new laws, making up anything that's possible that is restrictive, is popular. And I hope it doesn't continue, because we're really losing an awful lot of rights.
You know, you mentioned that I guess ignition interlocks don't work very well in some cases. Can you say more about that? Like, what have you seen happen?
I've seen false positives. I've seen tests where they show that there's a failure or a lockout, or where somebody starts the car, blows once, and then they don't start it again, and that's considered to be a failure. We have instances where someone else gets in the car. That shouldn't happen, but it does. The car's sitting outside, somebody else gets the key, starts it, that's a failure. They've got to explain it, prove it. We have a big problem with probation violations in those situations. That's very, very common. I see this at least several times a week. I get calls for this type of situation.
So the most common one is what? Someone else gets in the car and starts it and doesn't know that they need to blow?
The most common one is that there's a problem in the calibration of the unit.
Oh.
Second would be that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and you mentioned devices on phones. I haven't heard about that, but can you say more about what happens on phones?
Yeah, we have one where you can blow when you're at home, and it reports back what the results.
Huh. Okay.
There's also a monitor they can put on your leg, which tells you what kind of substances you have in your body. If there's any alcohol, anyway, it can measure. And it is terribly expensive. That's the biggest problem. The other one is it's expensive, and you can't take it off. It's a problem in the shower. There's all kinds of difficulties.
Okay. So, what do you see as the future of DWI in terms of punishments and the number of offenders?
Well, I think we're ultimately going to, at some point, if things go the way they have, we're going to see some kind of device installed on all cars that you have to blow in before you're able to start it. I hope that never happens, but it looks like things may go that way, because we're running out of penalties that we can impose on people and limitations. And if you want to be sure that nobody's drinking, I guess that's probably the way to do it. But but that's a possibility. I don't know. In other areas, we probably will see longer penalties, longer jail sentences, potential jail sentences. You don't very often see legislators coming up with more lenient punishments. They've always got to come up with something that's stricter. So I think that's probably going to happen.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier that you've been defending these cases since 1972. So it's a long time. It's 40 years. Have you seen that? Well, no offense, but it is a long time. But it's a good thing. Have you seen that people have changed over the 40 years? Have you seen? Yeah, I guess in the people themselves, the defendants, have they changed?
Attitudes have changed. People haven't changed. we see a lot less tolerance than we did. Texas is an unusual state because most people here pride themselves on their individualism, being kind of rugged. A lot of folks think that like to be outdoors people. It's a different attitude than in many other states.
Right.
But I don't think that people have really changed. But we've certainly seen changes in attitudes, demographics. We didn't, years ago we didn't have the same minority or proportions of minorities that we have now. We had a lot of blacks, but we didn't have the Hispanic population in the numbers that we have now. And I think that's one important point. I think that may help as we have more diversity and more balance. I think we may see better treatment of everyone. And I think that I am encouraged about that.
Okay.
Because I think that the voting blocks are changing, and as that happens, I think we may get a little bit better, maybe hopefully some better legislation and a little more fairness in the system.
Okay. And earlier on, you hinted at, I guess the law is that a police officer needs probable cause to pull someone over for suspected DWI, but you seem to hint at the fact that police will be, they'll pull people over for the slightest offense. Is that what you've seen? Can you say more about that?
Yes, that certainly does happen. And if it's late at night and there are not too many people on the highway, we'll see police officers follow people for miles, waiting for them to commit a minor infraction. Probably the one that you see the most that really is not really a violation of the law, but people get pulled over for is they'll call it an illegal lane change. They'll say that the tires crossed partly over a divider or over markings in the highway. That's not really a violation of the law, but they'll use it as an excuse to pull someone over. And very often, when we are on motions to suppress, which are the hearings where we decide whether constitutional rights have been violated, that's probably the one particular alleged violation that results in more grants of suppression.
Okay. So, my last question is, what makes you and your firm unique in providing DWI defense, and what personal statement do you want to make to all potential clients that may watch your video?
I think it's the amount of care that we give to their case, the amount of attention that we give to it. In every situation, we try to look at everyone as uniquely individual, analyze what happened, explain to them what happened, and probably one thing that really is different, we return phone calls. I think you'll find with lawyers, that's a huge problem. One of the major complaints that I hear from people is my lawyer won't call me back. When I call, I can't reach him.
Yeah.
You won't explain things to me. You won't have that problem here because we pride ourselves in that interpersonal contact and trying to make sure that everything is understood as we go along and no mysteries.
Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for doing the interview. I really appreciate it.